What's up, snappers? Welcome back to the channel. DDDREWSKY here. We're gonna be looking at the brand new card Scorn to see if she's worth your precious resources. We're gonna see her key synergies, counters, and some decks that I brewed for her. But wait, before we do that, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for 500 subs.
Now we're going for 1,000 subs.
Now let's get back into it. So now the question is, who is Scorn? Let's take a look. So Scorn in Marvel Snap is a 1-cost, 2-powered card. When you discard this, return it to your hand and give 2+ power to itself and one of your other cards in play. I believe it's a very cool and a unique ability for, discard especially. I think she has a crazy amount of potential to grow in power, especially with all the enablers that we have right now in the game. This card is just a classic archetype that a lot of people enjoy. So now let's look at some of the pros and cons about Scorn. So the first pro about her is that she's great in scaling powers. There's cards like Blade, Calling Wing that can, make her go off and add power to cards on the board, which is great. The next point is that she adds power to other cards. A lot of people love scaling cards, and especially if you can affect other cards with another card is, really, really good. So I think, she has a massive amount of potential right there. Another pro is that she stays in hand until played. So for example, if you discard her, she comes back to your hand. She keeps returning to your hand technically. So again, she doesn't really have the potential risk of getting countered as long as she's returning to your hand. Another good point about her is that she's a 1-cost, high-powered card. So depending on how greedy you want to get with her, maybe using Wong with her as well. But yeah, she can get to a crazy amount of power. Just look at, for example, Deadpool, right? 1 cost, you could get him to a crazy amount of power at the end and then just literally play her down if you really wanted to. But yeah, she is great. If you could get her to a crazy amount, she is amazing as a 1 cost. Let's start with the cons about her. So there's easy ways to counter her. Again, there's cards like Shadow King, or there's other cards that could mess up your draw, right? I know a lot of people don't use Baron Mordo or Crystal, but there's potential to ruin some of the combos that you want to do with her, right? So there are ways to counter her, and they could be easy. Another point about her is that she's only viable in discards. I don't really see her being super flexible as a card because you do have to surround her with a lot of discard cards. So yeah, I think overall she's primarily going to be only working with discard cards. Another con about her is that she requires a discard enabler, or discarder, I would say. She would have to be paired up with cards like that will enable her. Now let's look at some of the key synergies and counters for Scorn. So the first synergy that I want to bring up is Calling Wing. She will target the lowest cost card in your hand and will discard it. So again, she's perfect pairing. Swordmaster is another great synergistic card because he targets odd costed cards, and obviously she's a 1-cost card. So she and him will be perfect together. He is finally viable with his change. And with Black Knight, there's some synergy there too, right? Obviously you want to play Black Knight a little bit later once you get Scorn pretty big, or the timing is really crucial with Black Knight. But I see synergy there. You can get a massive amount of power with Scorn, and then get a Blade out of it. So some counters though, of course, like I mentioned earlier, Shadow King, the amount of power that you generate with her, and if you can time it right, you can counter her. She goes back to 2 power on the board potentially, or the cards that are on the board, you can reset their power back to where they were after Scorn has added that power to them, right? And another counter is Cosmo, right? Make sure you're not hitting a lane with Cosmo in it. And one of my spicy picks is Crystal. So she could ruin your combo potential. I know a lot of people don't really play Crystal, but again, she could ruin that. Just like Baron Mordo, for example. This card is very combo driven, so you want to be careful of people potentially ruining your draw. So cards like that, you definitely have to be careful for. All right, now let's take a look at some of the decks that I have brewed. I think they're pretty fun and competitive. Let's take a look. So the first deck that we have is called Scorn's Wasteland. So this is my take on the classic discard. So the ideal goal of this list is to ramp up power by discarding, cards, especially like Dawkins Shard or even Scorn herself. Play patterns would be like using Blade or Calling Wing to discard Scorn. You could even use Swordmaster's new ability to discard Scorn. But essentially you want to keep discarding Scorn, ramp up a lot of power. You could even have Morbius or Collector on the board and basically just keep discarding Scorn to a crazy amount, and all those cards like Morbius or Collector or even Dracula that's on board will keep, you know, generating and keep growing in power. MODOK is great to just discard and wipe your entire hand. Apocalypse has great synergy with Collector. Pretty much this deck, you don't really have to worry too much of like what you discard. The only cards you have to really worry about are Dracula and Morbius and Collector. The rest of the cards you could kind of pretty much wipe out your entire hand. But ideally, you're just constantly hitting Scorn and discarding her and generating all this power for the cards on board. I'm probably going to try out this one first, but now let's take a look at my second list. So this list is called Scorn's Disruption. So what you want to do is there's the hood. You can Viper even over the hood. You could use Korg, Rock Slide to just add more cards to their deck for Darkhawk value. Scorn, there's Blade and Calling Wing synergy with Scorn, and Swordmaster as well. Just keep using those 3 cards to discard Scorn and generate all that power on the board. You could even use the brand new card Misery to re-trigger any of these cards like Korg, Blade, Calling Wing, Rock Slide, Swordmaster, or even Viper. There is some synergy with Black Bolt and Stature. Stature will get all the value from all the discarding, so she's pretty much a guaranteed 1 cost in this deck. Misery is kind of like a flex card, so if you don't have Misery, you could always use Shang-Chi. But overall, I think this deck has a lot of potential in growing in power and disrupting your opponent. So now let's take a look at my final list. So this deck name is called Hela's Scorn Hand. The objective of this deck is basically to discard everything and then bring it back with Hela. Again, you could use Blade, Calling Wing to discard Scorn to generate power for those cards on board. You could use Luke Cage to protect all the cards that come back from Hela. You could use Lady Sif to hit any of the big cards, which are a lot, like Goliath, Magneto, Infinite Death. Black Cat is a free discard, which is great. You could even use Blink if you're kind of in a pickle of what is on board or what your hand is. You could use Blink to basically bring out like a huge card like any of the 6-cost cards and even Hela, right? So ideally, I could see potential with this. All right, now let's take a look at the spotlights that are featuring with Scorn. So Scorn is paired up with Jean Grey and Sebastian Shaw. Jean Grey is a Series 4 card, Sebastian Shaw is a Series 5, and Scorn is a Series 5 card. So I would say Jean Grey, she's definitely hasn't really fleshed out in the meta, unfortunately. She was pretty good in like an ongoing list, but overall I wouldn't say she's a must-have, so she's definitely passable. Sebastian Shaw, I would say is a pass as well, but if you do enjoy Surfer, or if that's like your style of card, or even an on-reveal deck, Sebastian Shaw does have potential there, but I think for most cases he's a little bit too niche, so he's definitely passable. The spotlight variants, I would say Jean Grey and Sebastian Shaw are passable. Scorns I think is really pretty cool, but I think overall you can definitely pass on most of the variants. So I would say if you're gonna get Scorn, it's probably gonna be a token week, but again, you know, Ardip's subjective. If you want to go for those variants, totally go for it, but I would say for most people, definitely you can pass on this week for spotlight variants. Now let's take a look at my star ratings for Scorn. So I gave her a 3.5 stars for competitive. I think she'd be pretty good, but again, very niche. She's gonna be only really living in like discard decks, but overall I could see her being pretty competitive. For fun, I would say 3.5 stars. You know, a lot of people love cards that grow in power, so I think she has a lot of potential there, and it's definitely very exciting to see, you know, cards go bigger and bigger, right? For flexibility, I would say 1.5 stars. Again, like I mentioned, she's only gonna be living with pretty much more or less discard cards. So if you don't like that type of archetype, she's pretty inflexible. For feature changes, I would say 2.5 stars. It really depends on how powerful she is. She did get nerfed before her release, so again, I don't know when Second Dinner it will attempt on, you know, nerfing her, so just be wary that she already got nerfed, so maybe she has a little bit of time to live in the meta, but again, if she goes kind of crazy, then of course she could get nerfed in the future. Now let's take a look at my final review of Scorn. If she's worth a snap or skip, let's take a look. So I say snap on Scorn. I think she has potential to be one of the great one-cost cards in the game. Personally for me, I love cards that, you know, grow in power slowly. So this is definitely my cup of tea. And this card I think is very underrated, especially, you know, traditional discard. I think she's gonna work beautifully in that type of list. You could even throw her in decks that I haven't mentioned, like Wong, you know, Gambit as well. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Scorn in the comments below. Please, again, make sure you like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subs of this channel, so definitely be one of them. And I'll see you guys on the next Snap or Skip. Happy snapping.